Hi, this is Raghu Bala with your Module 3 roundup for the week. I'm going to summarize some of the things that we learned this week. The first concept that we looked at was from Professor Basile, who mentioned about keyword matching and how chatbots can keep a kind of conversation going by simple keyword matching by trying to sound intelligent and so on. Actually, the funny thing is, my daughter goes to high school, and I had help her on a chatbot project recently, and it was not very intelligent, but it would just answer with some random conversation when you put in some input text and so on. So that's what she was referring to, Professor Basile in her videos. And then the funny thing that she mentioned was this example where the Berkshire Hathaway stock from Warren Buffett would change whenever Anne Hathaway movie was playing in the cinemas because the sentiment analysis algorithms that were being used out there were confusing the two Hathaways. That kind of sounded funny. So we're still at the very infancy of this technology, as you can imagine. And then another thing that to indicate the infancy was how language has got ambiguities. And the example that I like to mention is hospital sued by 7-foot doctors. So if you read it as hospitals sued by 7-foot doctors, so foot doctors is one phrase, that means by 7 people. Or you can say hospitals sued by 7-foot doctors. So 7-foot is the phrase in the second meaning, by very tall doctors. So one obviously doesn't sound right, the other one sounds right. But this is where humans can disambiguate, and then machines have a more difficult time interpreting such meaning in languages. But that's one of the challenges of, I guess, natural language processing. And then we went on to talk about two types of approaches to NLP, and one was symbolic approach, the second was statistical, and I guess statistical approach was scorned upon by Chomsky and so on in the past. But then in recent times, I think with big data and the whole cloud computing environment and so on, most statistical approaches have come to the forefront. And then we talked about representing knowledge and representing information using vectors and so on. And then in deep learning, one of the examples I really liked from the videos was where deep learning can see which concepts go together and which don't. For example, apple and pear go together because they're both fruits. Then pear and dog don't go together because one's an animal and one's a fruit. But that comes about through deep learning, where if you compare these words with a corpus of lots of documents and text, then you begin to see that, oh, you know what, apple and pear sort of like fruits, and they tend to come together in various documents and things like that. So then we talked about natural language generation, and again, a lot of these technologies require a lot of training data and so on. And then in natural language generation, the idea given was to create using templates. So you have these templates that you create, and then you plug in various values into the slots. So for example, in my business, I have to do a lot of signing of agreements around IP and also non-disclosure agreements and things like that. A lot of them are boilerplate with slots to plug in the company names and the signatures and the date and the length of the term and what technology and whatnot. So a lot of slots, and then the general outline is a kind of a boilerplate. And then we talked about what types of things can't be done by natural language processing, and this word comes up again and again in several of the videos, which is reasoning. So machines can sort of like learn from observation and abstract learning, but they cannot reason very well. So we're not there yet. I think over time there'll be an area of research to make machines reason a little bit better. And then Professor Levy had a few videos, and he focused on two major use cases, which is call centers and in legal documents how you use natural language processing. And I like the way he broke down one thing, which was how machines, first of all, they do speech recognition. So they first try to figure out what you're trying to say, and then once you figure out what you're trying to say, then comes NLP to figure out what are the meanings of what you just said, and then finally, once the meaning is understood, then you go and retrieve information based on that meaning. And AI, a lot of AI is based on what it's already exposed to. If you go and use AI in an area where it's not trained on a particular topic, it probably won't be able to retrieve the right or relevant information. In the legal context, he mentioned about document classification to figure out in a discovery of a trial or which documents were relevant and not relevant and so on. So I think there's some interesting use case for natural language processing in that space. And then the final set of videos were with Dario from IBM Watson. And Watson, I learned a lot just like you, and what it is capable of doing and so on. And at least in the natural language processing front or language area of Watson, there were a few things that came out of the videos that were interesting. First was knowledge graph construction and extraction, basically representing a knowledge in a kind of a tree structure or a kind of a state diagram, maybe with entities, nodes, edges, relationships between these entities and nodes and so on. So the representation of knowledge has to be, there's a structure to represent knowledge. And then once you have that knowledge representation, then one of the things that Dario mentioned is very interesting, because you need less data to learn more, because you already have prior knowledge, and prior knowledge is sort of captured in the form of these knowledge graphs. And then other tools within Watson that were interesting was in NLP, that concept extraction, parsers, and sentiment analysis. And then the translation, which is from, let's say English to Portuguese, learning and reasoning. So learning, he said, was very automated. We have automated methods. But reasoning is one area that he kind of mentioned. It's not in Watson, but one area that is area of research, but still very, sort of in its infancy or very weak right now in terms of machines being able to reason. Some of the use cases that he mentioned was sentiment analysis, and then comparing paragraphs, chatbots, transcription, translation, and recommender systems. And then finally, a couple of areas where some of these capabilities of Watson could be used. He mentioned a couple of use cases. One was tax, where there's lots of tax documents that one has to pour through to understand what's going on. And then in scientific research, where there's a lot of scientific material being published daily, and then no one scientist can keep up with all the content. But if something could summarize or to compare these publications to say, okay, what to focus on, that would save a lot of time and be of assistance to the human. So that, in a nutshell, kind of wraps up what we saw in Module 3. This week, we had a number of good posts. I'm going to highlight 3 of them and actually post the material that some of you folks had shared on the discussion forums in my roundup video thread. So do take a look. So Luca Perugini posted a link to the Practitioner's Guide to Natural Language Processing. It is an interesting step-by-step NLP guide. I'm going to post the link. Do take a look. It was, I think, pretty useful. The second was Hector Monroy, and he had given his own experience with Google Translate, how he went back and forth between English and Spanish, and what he would post and what Google Translate would post, and back and forth. So that's a pretty interesting thread, and if you get a chance to take a look at that. Third one was particularly interesting. Magnus Magnuson had posted something about soul machines, and I then looked it up, actually, the soul machines on YouTube, and I found a link, and I'm going to share that with you. That shows how that Soul Machines is actually a good example of natural language processing and also showing emotion. It's very similar to the Google Duplex, but the Google Duplex did not have a sort of a human representation, whereas this Soul Machines has a kind of robotic, image, more humanoid image on YouTube that you can interact with, and it talks to a human being. If you just watch it, then you'll see what I'm saying. A pretty interesting concept. I want to share that. So this is the beauty of this course, right? Where all of you are doing your own research, finding interesting things, sharing, and it not only helps your fellow participants, but also us from the teaching core actually find it very interesting as well. And vice versa, whenever we find interesting posts, some of you challenged me to find a couple of things, and I had to dig it up and look it up and so on. And then we unearth some interesting facts, and all of these are usually coming from a practical standpoint. Someone has a need in a let's say a customer service situation or whatnot, or someone else in an insurance company or whatnot. So these are practical situations where we need solutions, and I think participation in the course is enhanced by posting and sharing on the discussion forums. So that brings us to a close for week 4. And next week we go into robotics, and that'll be an interesting week ahead. A lot of you might think, I've got nothing to do with robotics, my work is a desk job, and so on. I'll be posting some interesting links online, and I want you to start to think outside the box, because I think the natural tendency is to say, robot and my work is a paper job, it's like a, I'm at a desk job, so what has that got to do with the robotics? So, but I think a lot of you might want to look outside your own job specification, look at what's happening inside your company, look at various job functions, and then you'll find that robotics can play a role. And robotics doesn't need to be a humanoid robot with arms and legs moving around and so on. It can be something which can perceive, which can share. It could be a security camera, it could be a Roomba that is cleaning the office every night instead of a human. Could be some simple thing that might automate your processes and make it more efficient. So more on this later, but have a good week ahead. We'll see you in week 5 now, actually. So week 4, sorry. So we got another couple more weeks. We're past the halfway mark. So thank you. Have a good one.